Winston Churchill. Why is he one of Britain's most important prime ministers? When you study British history for the Life in the UK test, one name appears again and again. Winston Churchill. But who exactly was Churchill? Why is he considered one of the most important prime ministers in British history? And why is his name so closely connected with the Second World War? Was Churchill simply a great wartime leader? Or was there much more to his political career? In this video, we are going to explore the life and political career of Sir Winston Churchill, focusing on the facts that are particularly useful for the Life in the UK test. By the end of this video, you should know who Winston Churchill was, when he became Prime Minister, why he became famous during the Second World War, why he lost the 1945 election, why he returned to power in 1951, and why his name remains such an important part of British history. So let's begin. Who was Winston Churchill? Winston Churchill was born on the 30th of November 1874 at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. He came from an aristocratic family. His father was Lord Randolph Churchill, a Conservative politician. Churchill was educated at Harrow School and later attended the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. Before becoming one of Britain's most famous politicians, Churchill had already experienced a remarkable life. He became a soldier. He worked as a journalist and war correspondent. And he travelled to different parts of the British Empire. These experiences helped him develop both military knowledge and a reputation as a writer and public speaker. Churchill entered Parliament in 1900. Interestingly, he did not spend his entire political career in one party. He began as a Conservative, later joined the Liberal Party, and eventually returned to the Conservatives. This is an important reminder that British politics has changed considerably over time. Churchill eventually became one of the most prominent Conservative politicians of the 20th century. Churchill before the Second World War. Churchill held several important government positions before becoming Prime Minister. One of the most important was First Lord of the Admiralty. He was responsible for the Royal Navy. During the First World War, Churchill was heavily involved in military planning. However, the disastrous Gallipoli campaign damaged his political reputation. He resigned from the government and temporarily left frontline politics. But Churchill did not disappear from public life. He returned to government and later became Chancellor of the Exchequer. However, the most important period of his career was still ahead of him. During the 1930s, Churchill became increasingly concerned about the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. He repeatedly warned that Germany was becoming a serious threat. Many British politicians wanted to avoid another major European war. The policy of trying to avoid conflict with Hitler became known as appeasement. Churchill strongly criticized this policy. He argued that Britain needed to rearm and prepare for the possibility of war. At the time, many people disagreed with him. But after the Second World War began, Churchill's warnings appeared increasingly important. 1940 – Churchill becomes Prime Minister. Now we reach the most important moment in Churchill's political career. In 1939, Britain declared war on Germany after Germany invaded Poland. The British Prime Minister was Neville Chamberlain. But in 1940, Britain's military situation became extremely serious. Germany invaded several countries in Western Europe. Norway was also involved in the crisis. The pressure on Chamberlain's government increased. Eventually, Neville Chamberlain resigned as Prime Minister on the 10th of May 1940. And on the same day, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. The timing was extraordinary. Britain was facing one of the greatest military crises in its history. Churchill formed a coalition government, bringing together politicians from different political parties. This was not a normal period of party politics. Britain was fighting for its survival. The National Archives records Churchill's wartime government as a coalition government from the 10th of May 1940 to May 1945. And Churchill's role was not simply to manage the government. He had to convince the British people that Britain could continue fighting. Churchill and the Battle of Britain. One of the most famous periods of Churchill's leadership came in 1940. After the fall of France, Britain stood largely alone against Nazi Germany in Western Europe. Germany planned an invasion of Britain. But before an invasion could happen, Germany needed control of the skies. This led to the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force, or RAF, fought against the German Luftwaffe. British pilots defended the country from German air attacks. Churchill became closely associated with this period because of his speeches. His speeches encouraged people to continue resisting Germany even when the situation looked extremely dangerous. His words became symbols of British determination. But it is important to understand something. Churchill did not win the Battle of Britain by himself. The victory depended on many people. IF pilots, ground crews, radar operators, civilian workers, the Navy, the Army, and millions of ordinary British citizens. Churchill provided political leadership and helped maintain national morale. The Battle of Britain was a crucial moment because Britain remained in the war. Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin. Another reason Churchill is so important is his role in the international alliance against Nazi Germany. During the Second World War, Britain worked closely with two major allies. The United States, led by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin. Churchill developed a particularly important relationship with Roosevelt. The three leaders became associated with the Allied war effort. Churchill traveled extensively during the war to meet Allied leaders and discuss military strategy and the future of Europe. These relationships were extremely important because defeating Nazi Germany required cooperation between several major powers. Churchill therefore became not only Britain's wartime leader but also one of the central international leaders of the Second World War. Why was Churchill such a powerful speaker? One of Churchill's greatest political strengths was his ability to communicate. He was an exceptionally skilled writer and speaker. During the darkest moments of the war, his speeches helped create a sense of determination and resistance. He did not promise that victory would be easy. Instead, he prepared the British public for sacrifice and continued struggle. His speeches became famous because they expressed the mood of wartime Britain. This is one reason Churchill became such a powerful symbol of British resistance to Nazi Germany. But there is another interesting fact. Churchill was also a writer. He wrote extensively about history and politics. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. So Churchill was not only a politician and wartime leader. He was also an author and historian. Churchill loses the 1945 election. Here comes one of the most interesting parts of Churchill's story. You might expect that the man who had led Britain through the Second World War would automatically win the next election. But that did not happen. In 1945, Britain held a general election. Churchill's Conservative Party lost. The Labour Party won, and Clement Attlee became Prime Minister. Why? Because Britain had changed. The war was over. People were thinking about the future. They wanted a different kind of Britain. Many voters wanted social security, better housing, healthcare, and greater economic security. The Labour Party promised major social reforms. And Labour won a large majority. Churchill therefore went from being Britain's wartime leader to becoming leader of the opposition. This is an important lesson about British democracy. Even the most famous Prime Minister can lose an election. and voters can decide that they want a different government. Churchill returns to number 10. But Churchill's political career was not over. In 1951, the Conservatives won the general election, and Winston Churchill returned as Prime Minister. This was his second period in office. His second premiership lasted from 1951 to 1955. Think about how remarkable this was. Churchill had already been Prime Minister during the Second World War. He had lost power in 1945. Then, 6 years later, he returned to 10 Downing Street. By 1951, Churchill was already 77 years old. The National Archives records that Churchill became Conservative Prime Minister again in 1951, at the age of 77. His second government was very different from his wartime government. Britain was no longer fighting Nazi Germany. Instead, the country was dealing with the challenges of the Cold War. Churchill remained strongly interested in international affairs. He supported closer cooperation between European countries, and he continued to play an important role in international diplomacy. Why did Churchill retire? By the early 1950s, Churchill was getting older. His health was also becoming a concern. He had suffered a serious stroke in 1953. Although he continued working, his health increasingly affected his ability to govern. Eventually, in April 1955, Churchill resigned as Prime Minister. He was succeeded by Anthony Eden. The National Archives records Churchill's second government as lasting from the 26th of October 1951 to the 5th of April 1955. Churchill's resignation marked the end of one of the longest and most extraordinary political careers in modern British history. Churchill's legacy. So why is Winston Churchill considered one of Britain's most important prime ministers? There are several reasons. First, his wartime leadership. He became Prime Minister at one of Britain's most dangerous moments. He helped lead the country through the Second World War. Second, his ability to maintain morale. His speeches became symbols of British resistance. Third, his international diplomacy. He worked closely with Roosevelt and Stalin during the war. Fourth, his extraordinary political career. He served as Prime Minister twice, 1940 to 1945, and 1951 to 1955. Fifth, his influence beyond politics. Churchill was also a writer, historian, and public speaker. His historical writings helped shape how the Second World War was remembered. But Churchill's legacy is not completely simple. Historians continue to debate many aspects of his career, including his views on the British Empire, colonialism, and some of his decisions before and during the Second World War. So we should not think of Churchill simply as a perfect historical figure. He was a complex politician who lived during an extremely complicated period of British and world history. Life in the UK Test: Key Facts to Remember. Now let's review the facts you should remember for the Life in the UK Test. Question 1. Who was Winston Churchill? He was a British politician and Prime Minister, best known for leading Britain during the Second World War. Question 2. In 2002, who was voted the greatest Briton of all time in a nationwide BBC poll? Winston Churchill. In 2002, the British public voted Winston Churchill as the greatest Briton of all time in a widely publicised BBC poll. He beat out other prominent historic figures like Shakespeare, Brunel, and Charles Darwin due to his leadership during World War II. Question 3. Which two professions did Winston Churchill hold before becoming a Conservative MP in 1900? Soldier and journalist. T. Winston Churchill was the son of a politician, Lord Randolph Churchill. Prior to entering politics as a Conservative Member of Parliament in 1900, He served as a British Army officer and worked as a war correspondent and journalist. Question 4. In which year did Winston Churchill first become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? In 1940. Churchill became Prime Minister in May 1940 following the resignation of Neville Chamberlain. He stepped up to lead a wartime coalition government during the height of the Second World War. Question 5. Which political party won the general election in 1945 immediately after World War II, causing Churchill to lose power? Labour Party. Despite leading Britain to victory in Europe in May 1945, Churchill's Conservative government lost the July 1945 general election in a landslide victory for Clement Attlee's Labour Party, which promised major social reforms like the creation of the NHS. Question 6. In what year did Winston Churchill return for his second term as Prime Minister of the UK? In 195. 1. After serving as leader of the opposition following the 1945 defeat, Churchill led the Conservative Party back to victory in the 1951 general election, serving as Prime Minister a second time until his retirement in 1955. If you are preparing for the Life in the UK test, don't just memorize names and dates. Try to understand the story behind them. Churchill's story connects several important parts of British history. The Second World War, British democracy, the role of the Prime Minister, the Conservative Party, the Labour government, the Battle of Britain, and Britain's relationship with the wider world. And that is why Winston Churchill remains one of the most important figures to remember when studying British history. If you found this lesson useful, make sure to subscribe for more Life in the UK test history lessons, important questions, and exam practice. Good luck with your Life in the UK test. And remember, understand the history, don't just memorize it.